welcome back to Just Advisor Things. Today, I am super excited to have our guest join us. We have Ed Larsen. He is one of my colleagues from when I was teaching. We worked in the same district, and he was so helpful to me when I first started teaching, and I knew nothing. And so I'm so excited for him to chat with us today and talk about his journey in advising and then what he's doing now. So welcome to Just Advisor Things. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to see you, Katie, and thank you. And you knew a lot more than you're giving yourself credit for.
I did have a really great teacher in high school, so she taught me a lot for sure. And she worked in our same district too, so she became my teacher, and then she was my friend, which is always a kind of a weird transition, I think. But I love that.
That's a good thing, though. It really is a good thing.
Yeah. It's different when you go from calling her by her teacher name to her, adult name, and you're out, having a drink together.
That's probably the hardest part to get used to, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I still call her Cypher because I really can't change it. But so tell us a little bit about your journey to advising first. So how you started teaching, but then also advising student publications.
Okay, well, I'll talk about that, but I'm going to go way back because I really got my beginning in scholastic journalism as a high school student, like many of us did. And I was on the newspaper side, though. I was a newspaper co-editor, but our co-editors with newspaper and yearbook kind of worked collaboratively back then, even then, which was kind of a unique thing. But we would do some planning to, content coverage things, especially where the photographers had to overlap, and we had to assign photographers to be, different places. But that's where I got started. And my high school experience actually led me into my first career, which was in radio broadcasting. And so I worked in radio from 1978 to about 1991 in the Omaha and Wichita markets up in the Midwest, where I'm originally from. And then from there, I had to find a way to kind of get out of radio at a time when I saw the industry changing. And so I actually went to work at our local church and did local church ministry for 3 years. Then I decided I wanted to teach. That helped kind of inspire that in me. And so I went back and finished my degree and got my certification and started teaching in Kansas. So my first yearbook was in the 1998-99 school year. And I got to tell you, that was a big jump, a big leap back then, because my experience from high school was cut and paste and copy paste up. And we were just starting to see the transition into digital photography and digital layout and design. And so I had to learn technology as I jumped back into my first year's advising.
Oh, wow. That's really cool to see that transition, though. And then now it's like different again. Like it's all different from even back then. But I love hearing that. When I was in 8th grade is when I had I did yearbook in middle school, and we still like printed out pictures and had the grease pencil and the cropper and everything like that, which feels so archaic. Even then it was 2002 and 2003, I want to say, but it was just at that, the switch over. And now I tell like students that, and they're like, a grease pencil? What the heck are you talking about?
I kept my pica rulers and my X-Acto knives just to demonstrate to students when I got started. It was pretty fun. And I still had a light table too, which was really kind of cool.
Yeah.
It was that and the typewriter were the most fascinating things for students to come in and see in the classroom.
They're like, a relic. What is this?
Yes, it did. It took some explanation. The typewriter was the best. I'd put a sheet of paper in it, and they would come in and they would kind of add a sentence, each different class period to what was going on through the day.
That's fun. Oh, I love that. And I love also, like in high school, I got to take film photography, which I think is such an art form that kids these days just don't get to experience. But it's actually funny. We're recording this right before Christmas, and my sister-in-law is early 20s, and she on her Christmas wish list has a film camera. And I was like, oh, yay, this is amazing. But it's like, where do you develop the film? And it's super expensive. So it's not really practical, but it's kind of coming back around. It's an aesthetic people are wanting again.
Yeah, I've seen some of the little Polaroids that have been popular with younger people recently. And so those are self-developing, but if you actually were trying to shoot 35 millimeter film, I don't know where you'd get it developed at these days.
I don't either, but it is coming back. So maybe there'll be more services, probably, like you have to mail it off and stuff like that to get your film back. But I thought it was really interesting. So,
it's fun.
Okay. So then once you started advising, what did that journey look like?
Well, for me, obviously, like every first year advisor, you just feel like you're starting with and running into a fire hose. So much to learn, so much to pick up that first year. For me, it was the photography side because we still were doing wet photography back in the late 90s. And so I had to learn darkroom and the chemicals and developing and all of that process. Even though we had a couple of brand new small digital cameras, they weren't of a quality yet that we felt like we could shoot everything the way we wanted to. And we were still doing a lot of our yearbook pages, in black and white with just a handful of color at the school I originally started at back in Kansas. And we were about a school of 900 students, which we were in the largest size classification, but we were one of the smaller schools in that 5A classification. So when we would compete, both athletically and academically, we were going against schools that were sometimes twice, almost 3 times our size of student population. But it was fun, and that's what that first year was like for me. I probably learned more from the returning students than they learned from me that first year, and I'm sure some first-year advisors may feel that same way.
Yeah, I think that's a common experience, which is cool. I like when teachers are willing to let their students, teach them also. So that's a good relationship.
So through my career, I think probably the most important thing I learned from year to year is that you really got to learn how to get organized in this job, and especially if you're doing multiple publications, which most advisors that I've had experience with have done both newspaper and your book, and maybe even broadcast, maybe a beginning journalism class or a commercial photography class as well. And that's a big part of learning how to balance those multiple preps. But with the yearbooks especially, it is really a full year job, and you've got to start that planning process months before the year even begins. And that's what I love about what you're offering advisors now too, is that opportunity, especially the, people new to the classroom and the journalism classroom, is tools that can help them get to that point where they've got to be organized. But some people don't even know what they have to do to get organized. And some of the things that I learned early on is that I needed to build a relationship with my administration, and I needed to especially build that relationship with the building secretary. So if you're watching this and you're a new advisor or just getting hired maybe in your first year and you haven't tapped into that yet, that's where I would start, because your calendaring process in the summer becomes critical to how successful you can start that year as the students come in, because you want to spend those first few days building your culture, getting them to know one another, building trust between them and you as the advisor, and then also hit the ground running with what you've got to do with production, especially on the photography side, because you don't want to miss those events at the beginning of the year.
Right. And there's so many beginning of the year events, sometimes even before school starts. You don't want to miss those either. So yeah, that's a good tip. Calendars are like my claim to fame, with the planner and everything. Like I have like a calendar for next year right here. That planning ahead, I think, is, like you said, crucial.
Yeah. So my advice to those, new first year advisors is you've got to really look at the entire school year. You've got to look at your sports seasons, your academic seasons. You've got to put that down in a calendar format, make it visual so that the kids can see it each day that they're coming into the classroom. And then the next thing I would encourage you to do, if, at the beginning of the school year, is start building the relationships with those coaches, with the directors in fine arts, with the club and organization sponsors, because they're going to be your best sources that you're going to need to tap to get the information your kids need to produce the book and to create content. And building those relationships for me meant also organizing how we wanted to go about doing group photos and team photos at different times of the year, because as you're planning your yearbook ladder, there's a season to each of those things. And so looking at that and understanding who fits into what season and how you can group those together and try to knock out team photos, group photos for clubs and organizations throughout that seasonal process. So I got to a point by about year 3 where I had an email that I would send before the school year even started to all of those coaches and sponsors. And I would outline a window of time where, saying, here's our yearbook staff. I would introduce our editors to them this year, and in that email, and then I would say, this is the time frame that we're really going to need team photos by, and worked on building that relationship so that I could get them helping to support me as the advisor and helping us meet those deadlines that are so critical throughout the year.
That's good. Getting really, really ahead of it. Like, I know, well, my first year, maybe second year, I ran into the softball team didn't have their new pants in or something. And they were like, well, we'll have it in April. And I was like, bro, my deadline is March 8th or something. And I was like, I can't wait for your pants. Have them wear something in the picture. Let's take one. And they just don't have any idea. But it was really on me because I didn't communicate it early enough. So they didn't know when my deadline was. They don't have any frame of reference for yearbook. So I love that even before the school year starts, so they can plan their calendars around you if needed.
Absolutely. And don't forget that you've got to plan and kind of back up your deadlines a little bit as well, because you have a day that your pages have to be submitted to your yearbook publisher, but you need to give and plan for time ahead of that, where your kids are going to have that day where they're absent or something doesn't come in, or the electricity goes out in the building, those weird things.
Always something.
Yeah. There's always something. So you want to back up your deadline and give yourself kind of a week to 10 days to pad on that as you're planning each of your individual deadlines throughout the year. That's critical as part of the organization process as well. So for me, the things were building those relationships, kind of building your team of support within the building, both admin, coaches, sponsors, directors, and getting them to work and recognize how important what you produce is to their programs as well. They may not initially be as excited about working with you, but you've got to kind of build that relationship to make that happen. And you've got to demonstrate to them why having a quality yearbook serving as a public relations tool for your entire building and being the biggest cheerleader for their programs as well is very important. And once you do that, once they can communicate that and get them to understand that, they'll come over to your side, and it will make your job a little bit easier.
For sure. I mean, getting them to understand what you're doing, not just from a calendar perspective, but really like, this is why I need those names, that roster, ahead of time before you're out their door hounding them, knocking on their window like, hello, I need that. I mean, everything I think in this industry is about relationships, like with your vendor, with your admin, with your coaches, with your kids, with each other. Like, there's so much that hinges on that.
Absolutely. It starts in your building, but we're going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about that relationship with your yearbook rep as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So what else, when you were teaching, did you learn about how to do it well?
Oh gosh. I really had to tap my network of advisor colleagues as well. One of the first places I went to do that when I was still in Kansas is through the organizations that you can become a member of as a scholastic journalism teacher. On the national level, you've got JEA and NSPA and CSPA. And what I found most helpful for me was joining JEA and getting on the JEA listserv, which is an email system. And I'm not sure how many advisors are still involved with that, but for me, 25 years ago, it was critical as a new advisor. I learned so much from people that I didn't even know who they were other than by name on their email. Folks like Jack Kennedy back in the day and H.L. Hall, those are they're kingpins in scholastic journalism. And I knew that if they had done it much longer than I had, they had a wealth of information that could benefit me. So I tapped that. And I just was one of those advisors that kind of lurked in the background, just reading everybody's comments and following. I don't think the first 3 years I ever even sent in a question, but I learned so much just from absorbing and sponging what was available through that listserv when people would ask a question. So start with those and use those organizations. They're valuable. They're worth the money to spend for memberships because they help you create a network of support that you need. And as you get involved on a state level with your state organizations, and here in Texas, it's ILPC and TAJE, and also the ATPI, which is the Association of Texas Photographer Instructors. Great organizations. They are led by people that are colleagues and similar, doing the same kinds of jobs. So they know exactly the challenges and problems that you deal with. And you need a network, because for most advisors, you're sitting out there working as an island in your building. And if you're fortunate enough to work in a large district that has multiple high schools like we did, you can create a cohort of your team of advisors from each high school in your district. The many schools that are smaller don't have that. And I really recommend that advisors that are new to the industry will get connected with a network of people that can support them. And that's another thing I know you can help with, because you've got a mentoring program. Would recommend that too if you're in your first or second year. I didn't have that, and I didn't seek it out. And I, looking back, I could have done a much better job, much faster at learning how to do this job had I done that. But I did, lean heavily on what I could find from people through the JEA listserv.
Yeah, I think that's my number one biggest piece of advice to any new advisor is go find your community, whether that's locally or nationally or in your district, or even in Facebook groups, whatever it is, there are people out there that can help. And I mean, I just don't know where I would have been if I didn't have, you guys in the district to help me, even just encourage me. It wasn't always just curriculum and logistics. It was you got this, just, that encouragement is so helpful. Or, we'd get together every 6 weeks or so and just talk about yearbook things. Cause, you can go home and talk to your wife and talk to my husband about the day-to-day dealings of a yearbook advisor, and they empathize, but they don't really get it we get each other. Yeah. So it's just so helpful to have those people in your corner that understand the weird life of yearbook advisor.
Yeah, you need a tribe, and that's what I found. And then when I came to Texas back in 2001 and got connected here, I really felt like I was in the place I needed to be. I taught at St. Ranch High School for 19 years. And one of the things that Texas has that Kansas didn't have was competition in the journalism arena through academic UIL. And I found that to be something that really intrigued me. And I used it as a recruiting tool very effectively, because, kids in Texas are a little bit competitive sometimes.
A little bit.
And that's not limited to our state, but it provides them a great opportunity to build and improve their skill sets journalistically, and then have some fun with it in a competitive kind of way as well. And I love that academic UIL in Texas, when you get to that state level, can provide a reward to students in the form of scholarships to their scholarship program. And so getting there is challenging. You've got to be good, you've got to be talented, but you've got to practice to get to that point. And so that's another arena that for new advisors can help you get better at teaching journalism as well, because the way the structure works in the journalism contests serves as a great curriculum process too. I would use the UIL prompts to teach my beginning journalism students, and news writing, feature writing, editorial, headline, and the copy editing. Those are just phenomenal skill sets that will help build your program if you can build a UIL sidebar with what you're doing in yearbook, and or other student publications.
Right. I definitely participating in that. I actually interviewed Alyssa Behringer, the UIL, I'm not sure, the director maybe, yesterday for the episode that came out last week, whenever this comes live. And we talked a lot about all of that, but I was telling her too that participating in those competitions, and in particular coaching them and judging them, taught me so much about grading my students and evaluating what feedback they need and stuff like that. That as a new teacher who I hadn't written a journalism related article since I was in 9th grade journalism 1 myself, that was so helpful that I was like, oh, wow, I totally even forgot the difference between, what you put in different types of articles, basic stuff. And so that was a really good refresher for me too. So it's great to get involved in that front. Also.
It's a great program, and it can really benefit you as a journalism advisor. It made me better, and the idea of helping grade is another. It's almost a professional development tool as a teacher that you don't realize, and nobody likes that word grading. It's kind of that negative connotation. But when you do volunteer to grade at invitational meets or at other convention competition, it does improve you as a teacher. You have that opportunity to, kind of collaborate in that process, and that's always a great learning tool as an advisor as well. So that's another area that I would recommend. In the time you don't have as a new advisor, but make time to do that, because it will help improve your skill sets as well.
Yeah. I mean, even if you don't have kids competing that you're coaching every week or whatever, they're always looking for judges for invitationals. And so even if you can just go to one, it's a couple of hours on a Saturday. It's worth the time to be exposed to that environment. Like it was an invaluable experience. I learned so much from that.
Well, and I'm anxious to hear the interview with Alyssa too, because I know that from her personal experience as a student years ago, that's really what got, that's where she caught the scholastic journalism bug as well. And look where she's at right now.
Right. Yeah. It's a lifelong career if you want it to be, which I think is cool, because there's a lot of kids that go into yearbook, we know they're not all going to go into journalism. They're not going to be traditional journalists, especially these days. And there really are so many career options that stem off of the journalism track. But also, I mean, a lot of us come from being a journalism kid. I was, you were, Alyssa was, it's very, very common. So that's.
I never would have considered myself any kind of a talent in the radio industry, but that's what scholastic journalism opened up for me when I was a high school student. And it can open up avenues in a lot of fields, the skill sets that we develop. One of the beauties of social media for me as a teacher is that since I've retired from the classroom, I still have those connections with students now dating back over 25 years. And to get to see what they've done with their lives, and how many of them have gone on to professional careers as attorneys and doctors and nurses. And they talk about the skill sets, even in a scholastic journalism classroom, that help them in fields that you would not necessarily make that connection with. One of my former students, who is now a heart surgeon, reached out to me about a year and a half ago when he was finishing his residency, and said that he'd had a chance to actually publish and design a publication for his cohort of students that were in his medical residency program. And he says, I had to go back and dust off some of those, some of those design skills to put that together. But it was really rewarding for me to see that. And I know he enjoyed getting to share that with me as well.
Absolutely. That's what I always tell advisors that are like, kids just don't care. I was like, you have to get them to understand the why behind what they're doing. And also these life skills that they're learning are so valuable. Like, doesn't matter what industry in, you still need to be able to communicate professionally, send an email that doesn't look like trash. Like these kids, especially we're so focused on our phones these days and quick communications, like a text, they still need to be able to probably design a PowerPoint slide professionally in any job that they do.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. You've got to communicate, and there's a verbal component and there's a visual component to it, and you've got to do it professionally no matter what field you end up in.
Yeah, even heart surgery. That's so cool. I love it.
It is fun. Well, some of the other things that I picked up throughout my career, I think what I learned in the classroom really helped me transition to what I'm doing now, because after retiring in 2020, which I didn't plan around COVID, but it just kind of turned out that way. Unfortunately, like many of the seniors from that graduating year, that kind of left me sitting out for a year or two, and, watching and just observing what was happening in the academic classrooms during that time, which was a big struggle for a lot of teachers. COVID really put the kibosh on a lot of yearbook and journalism programs, and it made it a very challenging couple of years to get through. So what I'm seeing now, as I've stepped into a role as a yearbook rep with Walsworth, is that there's some things that came out of that has actually made that positive. Learning really how to do things in a remote kind of way. And to be able to do the journalism using the technology that we have available as to, and you don't necessarily have to be face to face. I would always encourage my students to still do that, but there are times when you have to gather content and you don't have.
Oh no.
years. But for me, what I'm seeing now is getting the opportunity to work in the yearbook side of it on the production side. And as a rep, getting to see advisors and students in the classroom and navigate through that process. And that's been intriguing. It's been a learning curve for me too, on this side of the fence, but it's been really fun to and reconnect with my tribe of people. And then also, to feel like I can contribute and help new advisors as well, because that can be a daunting task to come and step into that role.
For sure. I mean, I feel like a great benefit that you have as a rep is that you have been an advisor. And a lot of times reps come from advising, but they also come from general sales. It could be they used to sell greeting cards or paper. I'm quoting the office kind of by saying paper, but but you have the experience like in the classroom, 19 years, or I guess you taught longer. I'm just thinking of Cinco. But you have the perspective of a teacher and an advisor, and then you can bring that to help them, not just with the logistics of getting their yearbook printed through Walsworth, but the day-to-day advising chaos.
Exactly. And it is beneficial for me, I think, having that background, stepping in. And it's one of the things that when I meet new potential clients, it's one of the things I talk about, because what I would encourage advisors to do as you step into your role, is, you want to have a relationship with your yearbook rep that you're comfortable with. You need to be working with somebody that you feel good about, that understands what your goals and your objectives are in the classroom, how you want to build your program. And if you're brand new to you may not even know yet what those goals and objectives need to be. And so those are some of the things that I can help them plan, I can help them develop. But as you look at that relationship as an advisor and working with your yearbook rep and your customer service rep with your company, you want those relationships to be a positive experience for you. But you also need to understand that in the role as the advisor, you have a responsibility to know what your contract looks like with your company. You need to know what your costs are. Part of your role as the advisor is kind of being the business manager, because you're really running a business within the academic setting. And if you're doing newspaper and selling advertising, you're running two separate businesses in that process, and maybe broadcast can be a third. So, you're teaching your students kind of a business mindset in addition to the other skills that they are in terms of developing content for production. And so your role, you need to have a level of comfort in talking about finances, and doing that with your rep as the year begins, so that you know where you stand. You know what your contract is, and you know what your costs are going to be, and then you can go from there and plan what your advertising revenue needs to be and what your book sale cost needs to be, to make sure that you're not losing money in this process. Your admin will not like that if that happens.
Right. I think a lot of times when advisors, especially brand new ones that are already overwhelmed, when they hear that they need to be involved in these conversations about finances and contracts and the legalities and the liabilities that come with that, that's super scary, because a lot of teachers don't have a business background. They don't have any, exposure into that side of things. And so they just push it off on their admin, which is also their job. The admin maybe is the one that signs the contract. But I think as the advisor, it's important to be in those conversations and have some input, also because you're the one interfacing with the rep every day. So you should have some input in who you're publishing with and stuff like that.
Well, and you're absolutely right that in today's climate, for most schools, the administration has to be a part of the legal contract signing process. The best scenarios are when advisors and admin have that relationship and are working together on that process as a team, so that as the advisor, you understand what your admin's responsibility is and vice versa. And the best administrators are the ones that will hire advisors that they can put their trust in, run the program that way efficiently, and keep it in the green. So know what your contract is, what the terms of that are, because some contracts can be a single year and some of them can be multi-year. And As you're coming into the program new, that's one of the first questions you want to ask. And then you want to know exactly what your contract cost is going to be. It's important to know what your contract costs are, but also to know what the additional costs might be throughout the course of the year. Things like shipping, depending on where you're located and where your publisher is located. Additional costs for producing enhancements to your cover or to your end sheets. Those are things that you want to have those discussions with your sales rep, and make sure that you're in a place where you know those costs aren't going to surprise you at the end of the year when your invoice comes.
Right, because they can be significant charges.
They can be, and it can be very expensive to do things like embossing and debossing, because most companies have to have those dies custom made for your custom cover design. And there's a variety of options that are available to advisors when it comes to that. And you don't want to necessarily be swayed into something that you regret making a decision about later.
Mm-hmm.
So know that you have that ability to have those conversations and be in control of those conversations with your sales rep. Don't be afraid to ask them those financial questions. It's important.
Right. Okay. So I have a question about that I see in Facebook groups come up a lot. It's kind of related to finances, but it's also related to deadlines. So a lot of times towards the end of the year, I see advisors post in the Facebook groups, frantic, panicking, saying, we're going to miss our deadline. What actually happens? What is this the end of the world? And a lot of advisors jump in, and I think their intentions are good to help the advisor that's in a panic. They say, don't even worry about it. It's no big deal. It just, as long as you get it in, it's fine. And that just makes me like itchy. Like, I'm like, no, first of all, like, you have to teach your students the importance of deadlines. So we don't want to just throw them out the window, but also sometimes they can cost you money. So from the, publisher perspective, can you explain a little bit about the impact of missing a deadline for real? And I know every publisher is different, but, just like, what would your advice be to those advisors?
Well, my advice is if you ever get a chance to do a tour of your yearbook company's plant, I would suggest you do that, because then you will see firsthand how many people are involved in the production of your yearbook from the time that you send in pages and your cover design until the time you get it shipped and sent to your school. And the reality of that is that it's a very significant number of people and a significant cost. So the reason that we have deadlines in the first place is because there's a time period that gets scheduled for the production of your book. And if you don't make your deadlines, then that means people who have been hired and are being paid to do the work on that side of it don't have the work to do because you haven't finished what you need to finish in time. Mm-hmm. And that's why there are financial implications that sometimes get passed on to schools if your deadlines are too far behind. Mm-hmm. The other component of that, the other fallout from missing deadlines, is you lose the scheduled ship date that you're expecting your book to come, because just because you're late doesn't mean they can go faster and mm-hmm. shorten the time frame. Yearbook companies are printing thousands and thousands of yearbooks in a very short time span in the spring and in the summer, depending on your delivery season. And from the perspective of the publisher's side, those deadlines are very important. Now, some companies offer that opportunity to give you some flexibility early enough in the year in terms of how you set them. Some mm-hmm. companies have very strict requirements that you have to have so many pages turned in by a certain time frame, and that's because they hire people and they can't just hire them for the 6 weeks that they're printing your book. Mm-hmm. These people have full-time jobs, and so it's a full-time year-long process on the production side. And because of the seasonality of yearbook production, there's a reason that has to be broken down into segments so that some parts of your book get printed earlier than other parts. And that's why we have deadlines in the first place. Mm-hmm. But you got to meet them. They are important.
I love that answer. Take a tour for sure. Like, that's a great way to have you understand the process as the advisor, but also take your students and, walk through the plant, and they will show you every step of the way. That's so helpful to really wrap your mind around that process. And if you can, like, turn stuff in early, because that helps them get your book out faster back to you. And then, I know that in a panic, no one wants to think about the fees they're going to incur because things are late, or, you know, you don't want to turn in incomplete pages. So it's always a balance. Like sometimes it's worth it to miss the deadline and pay it and get the yearbook done and have it be a good product. But also at the end of the day, I mean, you got to get it done. It's not going to be perfect. It just has to be finished. And so there's always that balance you have to find.
Yeah. In all of my years, I have yet to see the perfect yearbook.
Yeah. There isn't one so far.
It's as good as it can be at the time that it needs to be done. And that's kind of the goal. And it's something I used to share with my editors back in the day as well. Some advisors may wonder, well, why am I being charged a fee if we're late on a deadline? Well, if you're still expecting and demanding that you have that shipping date, then and you're late with your submission, what ends up happening is the yearbook companies have to pay overtime to additional labor force because you've thrown off the schedule. And so that's why fees get incurred on the production side.
Which is also a good lesson, I think, to share with your students. You know, talk to them about that implication, bring them into that financial conversation, because that's a life skill for them to learn too. In the real world, when they're doing a job, if that gets delayed, there might be fees incurred, you know, or they might be the one getting paid overtime to make up for someone else's lack
because
of.
The reality is, in the vast majority of work fields and industries, there's a collaborative environment happening there too. So having your students learn that skill set, that they're responsible for their part of that collaboration and that it be done on time. Otherwise, somebody else is sitting idle waiting for your work to get to them.
Right.
And that's very similar to what happens in our yearbook world.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for answering that. That's a great, well-rounded, detailed answer that I know I'm sure a lot of people are going to be.
The other thing I would tell advisors about working with your rep is if you're expecting a certain level of service from your rep, a certain level of marketing support from your company, a certain level of curriculum support and resources, and you're not getting that, don't be afraid to explore what your options are. Now, yes, you're in a contract and maybe you can't make a change immediately, but I used to explore what was out there even when I was advising, and I worked with 2 different yearbook companies that are actually different than the one I work with now. And through those experiences in my years advising, I felt like it helped me understand more about what my role needed to be, and it helped make me be more savvy as an advisor as well about how to manage what has to happen in my relationship with my yearbook rep. And thankfully, I was very blessed to work with 2 amazing reps from 2 different companies over my years. I never made a change, but that didn't mean I didn't explore what my options were. And there's some value in looking into that. And especially with all the changes that have been occurring in the last couple of years in the yearbook world, there's something there that I would encourage advisors to be aware of. But you still want to pick a rep in a company that is going to provide you with what your expectations are and that you're going to be comfortable working with.
Yeah. I have an article on my website that I will link in the description box below that's about what to look for, what to ask for in evaluating a yearbook company, because people ask me all the time, and I am very intentionally, what I say is publisher agnostic. Like, I don't make any recommendations. And that's because my whole goal is to focus on teaching and helping the advisor, but also because every program is different, every company is different, and that match is going to be different depending on regionally too, who the rep is and stuff like that. And there's just so many factors that I can't give a recommendation. You have to do the research, ask the questions, get the bids, get the presentation, have the rep explain to you what they offer and how they offer it, and get the vibe, and then make the decision in an educated way. So I think that it's only going to help you, even if you don't make a change, like you said, it's only going to help you as an advisor learn the process of, maybe if you need to switch someday or something, learning what's each company in your area offers.
And another way that advisors can do that too is using social media, because most of the companies have advisor social media pages. And if you go through and read comments through there, questions that get asked, how well other advisors from using that same company might respond, that can be a beneficial tool as well in helping you understand what each different, company's community does to support those advisors.
Right. That's good advice. Very cool, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share your experience as an advisor and now a rep. I think you definitely have a great perspective on being a rep. I know that it's a sales position, but like we said, everything relates back, especially in this industry, to that relationship. And because you have that experience as an advisor, you bring that to that sales relationship, and it becomes so much more valuable, I think, because you can really help advisors. So my final question, I guess, would be if you are talking to a brand new advisor who's just overwhelmed, doesn't know where to start. This is being published in January, so we're kind of midway through the year, but regardless, maybe it was in the beginning of the year, they just got hired. What advice would you give to them as they get started? Like what is their number one thing they need to do?
Well, a little bit like we talked about earlier, I think you've just got to figure out how you're going to organize your world. But the first thing I would say to a brand new first-year advisor is in that thought process to organize, realize that your first year, you're not going to be able to do everything that you might think needs to happen. So break it down and prioritize what you feel needs to happen, for your particular school, your particular publication, first. And then start initially building those relationships that are going to help support you in accomplishing that goal. That's where I'd start.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you were there my very first day on the job. So I so appreciate that advice that you gave me too, is just, one step at a time. I don't know if you said this, but my sentiment was you can't eat an elephant all in one day, like just one bite at a time. And so that's just so encouraging, I think, to somebody that is feeling like they're trying to take a drink from a water hose and they're completely overwhelmed. So,
well, and the second thing I would tell new advisors is that probably the most important thing beyond finishing a yearbook and getting it done is what's the culture you're going to build in your classroom with your students, because ultimately your success as a teacher is going to be built on how well your students are going to follow and work for you. You're like a manager of a business with student workers in some sense. And so you've got to build a culture and a climate in your classroom that encourages and builds them up and motivates them in such a way that they will want to do that work for you. Otherwise, it falls back on you to get it done, and you don't want that to happen.
Exactly. Someone's got to do it. That page has to get done. It's not like when you don't do your math homework and you get a 0, it doesn't really affect anybody else. In your book, it does.
Yeah. And tell your kids too that you're the only class in the school where your homework is published for everyone to see.
Right.
That's a great motivational tool.
They're like, oh my gosh, really? Crap, let's do it. So that's great.
And let's do it well.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. You guys join us back here next week for another episode of Just Advisor Things. We'll see you there. Bye.